Going to the doctor can be a very frustrating experience, especially for someone who shows blood values that are in a higher than normal range. And it can be extremely frustrating for that person if they have been given instruction on how to lower those high blood values, only to find that after following those instructions, there was no significant change. Scenario 1, you have gained weight. A commonly prescribed response is to eat less fat and eat less overall calories. Fat is 9 calories per gram, while carbohydrate is only 4 calories per gram. So if you do the math, the more fat that you eat is the more calories that you eat. From a calories in, calories out philosophy, this makes sense, but we've already ruled out this methodology because it doesn't take into account hormone activity, and hormones essentially control your metabolism. Scenario 2, you have high cholesterol. A commonly prescribed response is to eat less fat, eat less cholesterol, and more oftentimes than not, eat less overall calories. There is lots of fat in the blood. Stop eating fat and cholesterol. How could your cholesterol not lower after doing this? This is false. The human metabolism is not this simple. If you don't do the research, if you don't do the digging, if you don't prime the mind for a state of change, then this poor philosophy is almost impossible not to believe. Lucky for you, all of that research and digging is right here. You have high blood sugar, you have high blood pressure, you have vitamin and mineral deficiencies, and somehow the solution can be found in simply eating less. Every metabolic abnormality is responded with number 1, eat less fat. Studies show this does not work, especially long term. Number 2, eat less cholesterol. This is laughable considering that cholesterol is a classification of fat. You'd have a better shot at just removing fat. Number 3, eat less sugar. Not carbohydrate, but sugar. People only understand this as candy and sweets. While that's a good start, in no way is that a solution. Number 4, eat less sodium. This exists because decades ago, scientists found that if you take a person's blood pressure after they have fasted, and then take their blood pressure again after they have eaten something with sodium, blood pressure rises. Temporarily. Not permanently. It's like buying a cup of coffee, learning that it's too hot to drink, panicking, and then throwing it away. In an age where we are commercializing space travel and carrying iPhones, our health practice is lagging behind due to the reasons that we've talked about in the last video. Let's go through exactly how high blood fats actually happen and why fat can sometimes feel like it's permanently being stored. Here is a clip from Chapter 3 from my video course, Ketosis the Right Way. So let's look at an example from the standpoint of a high-fat intake. So we have our high-fat intake here, and what we know in our society is that it causes these disease states. Now, if we're solely focusing on having a high-fat intake, and then at the end of the day, we're looking at all of these people in our society who have heart disease, have heart attacks, arterial sclerosis, so on and so forth, and we really dissect their bodies and we look into what's happening and we're seeing the pile up, the blockages that are caused by fat, we're seeing a correlation. Now that's the thing, it's a correlation. It's involved. It's not the cause, but it's involved. Okay? But now, when we throw into the mix a high carbohydrate intake, okay, we find the same exact thing. We find these disease states being caused as well. So for many years, we've been neglecting the fact that maybe along with a high fat intake, okay, there has also been a high dietary carbohydrate intake present. Okay? It's very easy for us to blame dietary fat when we're finding fat in the arteries. And then we have something called liver lipogenesis. Now, what ends up happening is, as you're taking in macronutrients and your liver starts to see that there's an excess amount of carbohydrates. Glycogen stores are full in the liver, and so now there's an excess. What does it do with it? Well, it takes that sugar and it changes it to fat, and it stores it in the liver, surrounding the liver. This is visceral fat. This is the bad fat that we don't want. Okay, so a buildup of this visceral fat, and as visceral fat starts to expand, okay, the higher amount of blood fats you're going to have. And we're going to go through it together right now. But as visceral fat increases, all right, as you can see here, this is the visceral fat. As this increases, it's going to cause a backup in the blood. What ends up happening is the liver takes some of this fat surrounding itself, okay? It changes it into triglycerides, and then it pushes it into the blood. Okay, so this is when blood fats actually rise. Now remember, the reason why the visceral fat even came into place was because of excess carbohydrates in the diet. Insulin was secreted too much. Because there's too much carbohydrates in the diet, the liver responds by taking those carbohydrates, changing it to fat, and storing it surrounding it and the organs, okay? Pushes it into the bloodstream. This is where we start to see those high amounts of blood fats, cholesterol, triglycerides, and then the end result is going to be pushing those blood fats, okay, the excess amount of fat in the blood to your subcutaneous fat, which is the fat surrounding your body. And this is what your liver does in order to save itself. If the liver didn't do this, if it didn't push some of that visceral fat into the blood and then into your subcutaneous fat, you would die. This is a defense mechanism. So let's go over it one more time. The visceral fat here that's surrounding the liver, it was brought by the excess amount of carbohydrates in your diet. The liver needs to protect itself, so it takes that visceral fat, changes it to triglycerides, and pushes it into the blood to transport it to your subcutaneous fat. And as it transports it, it goes through the blood. And so that's where we find those high amounts of blood fats. So at first glance, it can look as if dietary fat is the problem, because we can store endless amounts of energy in the form of fat. And as you can see, just because there is a buildup of fat in the tissue and in the blood, this does not mean that is how it entered the body. Remember, you can only store 2,500 calories worth of stored carbohydrates before it is converted to fat in the liver. Coupled with the fact that every time dietary carbohydrate is consumed, insulin, the fat storage hormone, is secreted into the blood so that glucose can be taken up by the cells. So, double whammy. And we all know what the human body's fat capacity is. That's right, there is none. Well, of course, until a person dies from the buildup. Sorry to be a downer. If you are nervous about consuming high amounts of fat, that is completely understandable. We live in a society where the widespread belief and perpetual message is fat causes heart disease, cancer, and is not recommended for a healthy diet. If this hypothesis were forced to stand in a court of law, it would crash and burn. The fact is, when consuming high amounts of fat in the presence of low amounts of carbohydrates, the body will begin to heal itself. In my next video, I will be going through exactly what is offered in my video course and how it will change your life. If you have heard enough from me and are ready to change your life right now, click the button below to sign up for my course, Ketosis the Right Way. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video.